Zaczniemy teraz pierwszy z paneli na dzisiejszym wydarzeniu, który poprowadzi dr Michał Możdżeń, członek Polskiej Sieci Ekonomii. Oddaję panu głos.
I'm going to be speaking in English from the beginning, if it's all right with you. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation and a brief introduction by Janek earlier on, by the way, in the context of the Communist Manifesto, so thank you for that. But anyway, if Martin Wolf, the biggest and most senior editor of Financial Times, says he's a Marxist and to be an intelligent social scientist, you have to be a Marxist. And I think it's all right now. Okay, but joking aside, I'm really honored to be able to talk to 6 really distinguished guests, 2 of whom you already met, but I will introduce them invite and introduce them in a moment. First of all, I would like to explain the idea for the panel. Okay, I believe the concept of social and economic regeneration and its more sophisticated cousin, social negentropy, remains a vague one and very multifaceted. The same applies to polycrisis, which opposes thinking in terms of searching for the single underlying cause of social changes. And maybe this is how it should be. However, the less clear the definition is, the more scope for activism, contestation, and the more political the discussion. This is a place where I want to start. Liang quoted Keynes during her presentation, and I want to quote another post-Keynesian economist, John Robinson, who was very influential. In her essay, What Are the Questions, in 1977, so by the end of her career, she said these words: "There is no such thing as purely economic problem that can be settled by purely economic logic. Political interests and political prejudice are involved in every discussion of actual questions. In economics, arguments are largely devoted, as in theology, to supporting doctrines rather than testing hypotheses." This is an inspiring quote for me as a political economist, not least because it stands as a motto of my department at the university. So I put it there. I think my supervisor doesn't know yet, but well, it's still there. Robinson herself was, by the end of her academic life, considered to be a sort of scientific nihilist. But even if we are firmly wedded to the correspondence theory of truth, this thought, in my opinion, bears a profound wisdom, especially in social science. Our scientific choices as economists, sociologists, political scientists, etc., are not value neutral, and we all hold political agendas, even if they are subjected to the highest current standards of scientific rigor. And very often, as current debacle involving the superstar behavioral economist Dan Ariely shows us, they are not. This makes economics, as well as other social scientists, political in a sense of orientation on a common goal with distribution in mind. Okay? And that is something I want to talk about with my 6 distinguished panelists, which I invite right now. Piotr Arak, who holds PhD in public policy, is a director of the Polish Economic Institute. Sarah de Heusch, you already met. She holds a master's in sociology, so she's a trained sociologist, and she's a director of Social Economy Europe. Jan Liang, you already met as well, PhD in economics, Kremer Chair Professor of Economics at Willamette University, and Research Associate at the Levy Economics Institute. Zofia Łapniewska holds PhD in economics. In 2 weeks' time, it's going to be a habilitation, so we're crossing our fingers. She's an assistant professor at Jagiellonian University, co-chairs the Polish Economic Network. Stanisław Mocek, PhD and habilitation in political science, rector of Collegium Civitas. And Adam Rogoda holds a PhD in economics. He's an assistant professor at Warsaw School of Economics and is a member of the Polish Economic Network. My first question is more general and relates to the way you view yourself and the organization you represent as a political beings, okay? In a sense of actively striving to reach certain goals of the polity you are trying to influence and the policy you try to shape. First, I go to Sarah, because I believe it will be the easiest question for her, because she's actively political, okay? How do you view your political role, and how do you know that the goals you are fighting for are the right ones? What is the guiding light, in a way? Sorry,
This should be okay.
Just one quick remark, because I haven't told you about the technicalities of the panel. Every panelist will have 5 minutes of time, after which I will ask another question, and then we go to the Q&A session.
So as an activist for social justice, to be a lobbyist is weird, because to be a lobbyist is a bad word. It's like the dark forces normally, this is how we consider lobbyists. But we need lobbyists that also go and lobby for the right causes. If we only leave it to the multinationals, we're just going to keep on going how we have been till now. So if we want to change, we also have to be able to endorse roles that we think are not necessarily good. But politicians need to hear different voices, and that's why there are people whose job is to lobby. And my compass, I guess, is that I believe, and this is a belief, that I'm doing it for the right cause. Social justice is a very large domain. You can tackle it in different ways. And for me, doing it in lobbying for better ways of doing business and organizations, lobbying for an economic world that is embedded in social fabric and that takes into consideration its social impact and its environmental impact is crucial. And that's my compass. And so now I can proudly say I'm a lobbyist, even though it's a bad word.
Thank you very much. The lobbyist part was trolling from my part. So I wanted you to respond to the word which is considered a bad word, and it shouldn't be. Okay. Second, I turn to Piotr, as you had very influential and very much like rising in influence think tank, which increasingly shapes the economic debate in Poland. How do you view the Polish Economic Institute agenda, also in terms of raison d'etat? Yeah? So the reason of state. To what extent economic research guides it, and what is its instrumental value for the goals you advocate for other reasons? Okay, so in other words, whether the science is a guiding light or is it instrument that you use for other purposes?
Okay. That's the depth of that question is quite huge. So thank you. Just as a short introduction, because not probably somebody outside of Poland might not, or you all also might not know everything that we do. We're a quasi-governmental agency that was established 5 years ago and deals with economic policy. So not strictly fiscal, not monetary. Monetary, we try not to, the central bank employs many people and many economists, and they do, lots of them do a fine job in terms of doing economic projections or the supply of money or stuff like that. We don't deal with these issues. We deal with everything else. So behavioral economics, climate and energy policies on EU level, Polish level, and other matters which we find interesting. And what is? And I was thinking just before the panel, what's probably the most important issues that guide us in our day-to-day work. Yeah, so I would probably name a few. First one being, not modest, is my own instincts of what is interesting and relevant in the current circumstances, or what is not. So we also kill a lot of ideas of projects which could be interesting, but I don't see, the relevance of them. They're too scientific or too political in a way. We don't advocate for any political party, and I keep to doing that. And so this is the one issue. Then it's the political debate that we have in Poland, but also in the European Union. We do see what is the agenda of the European Commission for the next couple of years, and we try to bring this agenda, which is going to be relevant to our own debate in next 3 or 4 years. Today to the discussions, and some of these new developments, sometimes the developments of in various countries which are interesting from an economic point of view, like I don't know, the monetary policy of Turkey, which is quite interesting. Not that many people wrote on it. In Poland we did. And then there's the third driving force, which is these kinds of debates, exchanges with experts of what is interesting. Many meetings. I just don't know how many meetings through a year we have on various topics, from climate to like general macro and other issues, and also our council members, and sometimes politicians as well. So what is relevant in their work? What could be interesting to know in the next couple of years, or today, or to analyze, because they don't have an answer. And this also brings us to like a part of the analytics that we do is like on tap research, which is basically consulting on various topics, doing econometric analysis, answering some specific questions. And the last, but probably the most important driver of our own agenda is the ideas that our analysts have. So they create the research plan that we have, which then is basically everything that we publish throughout a year. So it's pretty much the ideas that a group of people comes to the table and then showcases. And this is what's driving the research agenda then that you might read basically in our weekly, monthly analysis, or in the reports that are published. Yeah, so that's my answer.
Thank you for that. Going further to Jan, this is going to be interesting because Jan is a part of the MMT school, which is strongly criticized on the part of the mainstream, and at the same time in the US it gains on importance, and I think it starts to be considered important also in the policy circles. As you already mentioned, that the Democratic Party is looking favorable to your views. Okay, but anyway, this is a controversial movement still in the economics debate, which is very petrified, because it stands a lot of things on their heads. Okay, so I think. Besides being a researcher, you're bound to be a scientific activist, a rogue economist, so to speak. Yeah? So how do you perceive the politics within the economics discipline? How do you overcome the problems that you see there? And does the current debate value pluralism, or is the discipline as petrified as it is often described?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great question. I think first of all, the way we looked at politics and economics is, how we differ from the mainstream economics is we're not afraid of talking about politics, and our analysis of economic problems, issues, policies are heavily featured in those value judgments and political processes. And I think that's what differentiates from a lot of mainstream thinking, is we put politics front and center in our analysis. But I think the second dimension when it comes to doing politics when you're analyzing economic issues is I personally have not sort of heavily involved in a lot of these sort of politics, right? Politics is too dirty. I don't want to be part of it. I have thought about sort of my own job is to sort of enlighten, right, the policymakers. I provide them the right recipe, but if they adopt these suggestions, that will be great. But if not, as an economist, I'm not sure what else I can do, right? But I think being part of the MMT community makes me realize that we do need to work on, some of these political day-to-day sort of battles. So one interesting thing is back in 2019, there are 5 Republican senators who have made a very unprecedented move, which basically pushed the Senate, the U.S.'s Congress, to condemn the MMT as a dangerous economics, post-dangerous to the economy. So, when the politicians go that far to condemn an economics thought, then there's definitely a lot of values, right, in that economic thought. So I think that that's an honor to be attacked by the politicians. So I think the way that MMT has been doing is really to try to get the open-minded politicians to understand the policy implications of a theory. So we have, for example, Stephanie Kelton, who was the policy advisor for Bernie Sanders, who was the Democratic candidate in presidential election back in 2020. And we also have progressive Democratic candidates like AOC, like Yarmouth, who's no longer the congressman, but still, I think, one thing that we will keep doing is send the messages out, right? And work with some of the open-minded, enlightened politicians to implement some of the policies that we recommend. On the other hand, we also trying to work with grassroots activists, groups, and so on, trying to build that pressure. And I think one of the reasons that mainstream can't avoid debating with us is because all these public opinions, that we actually engage people like, Furman and Laurie Summers on the Twitter, X. Because, again, there are these public opinions that in some ways push them to respond to some of the questions and challenges. So I think that's great to do. And at the personal level, I'm also involved in providing some policy suggestions and also business analysis for the Oregon state. We just had a public banking legislation that is ongoing. And so now we're hoping to establish a task force to discuss the possibilities and the economic impacts of establishing a state bank in the Oregon state, which is where I reside. So I consider this a really fruitful and effective way of engaging with politics and hopefully to get things done at the ground on the local level. And I'm working with my colleague in the law school at Willamette, as well as some wonderful law students and economic students. So we're going to produce in the coming months impact studies and hopefully other sort of reports to really advocate for a state-owned public bank in the Oregon state to really tackle with some of the very difficult issues like homelessness, like energy transitions and things like that. So I think to your question, I definitely think that politics is front and center. We study politics in economics, but we also wanted to get our hands dirty to work with like-minded politicians, but also trying to mobilize and get that political agenda going. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it is important that you fight for pluralizing the agenda on the economics front because it was too narrow for too long a time. And speaking about this, I would like to turn to Zofia, because you have chosen the lens of feminist and environmental economics, so you openly endorse value-laden economics. Yeah? In your opinion, is there, and if so, what kind of difficulty for economists working in an openly political and distributive paradigm to be respected in the field? How to balance the politics with the search for truth, part in your research agenda? So I guess this is 2 questions.
These are 2 questions. So, of course, feminist economics as well as ecological economics, they do not shy away from valuation and value judgment. And, of course, as you rightly pointed out in your introduction, quoting John Robinson, economics is political and always. And, of course, in terms of science, we always choose certain topics to investigate, then we collect data from particular sources, and or we do the research in the field, and then we interpret this data in particular way using particular theories. So of course it can be biased. No, it's not always biased, but yes. And but in terms of feminist economics, we should not have illusions that all feminist economists are socialists. Feminism is perspective in economics, and it can also be embraced by scholars in the mainstream of the debate. And responding to your second question, how to balance politics with search for truth. So, of course, I believe we do research because we search for truth. So we have some, let's say, attempts might be imperfect. We have some assumptions, and they might be wrong, because that's why we do research for. And it's also in feminist economics, so we share certain values, like we want women to participate in other marginalized groups nowadays on equal terms in economy, and yes, and to have the same stance in their professional work and public space. But is this the dream of all women all over the world? That's a big question. Yeah, so I think it's also the same with democracy. So that is the question. We have our model of democracy, but does it work everywhere in the world? And well, maybe we should leave also other cultures the space and the right to shape their socio-economic conditions and realities in their own way. So yes, so we also have to recognize that we are wrong, and we should say sorry if we were wrong before. So yes, and I think that as scientists, yes, we should always search for truth.
Thank you for this very concise answer. I was also thinking that the truth itself is very social in nature, because it's constructed in a debate. But let's keep it brief. Now I would like to turn to Adam, because you deal with developmental economics, and I would argue that this may be the most openly political branch of economics, okay? Because it deals with changing the situation of inducing development. How do you view the current post-Washington consensus discourse around economic development, both in the center countries and in the peripheries? And another question, has it become more scientifically based in recent times, the debate and the research? And how do you perceive your place in it?
Well, you raised a lot of issues, so I try to be brief and address them in the reverse order. So, first of all, my position, totally insignificant. I position myself within the tradition of selective industrial policy and developmental state perspective. And has the discourse become more scientifically based? Well, yes and no. Yes, because the field is extremely diverse. Even the mainstream became more diverse. a lot of insights from, let's say, experimental economics, evolutionary economics, industrial policy approach has been incorporated into the mainstream. Well, a lot of content has been lost in the transition, but still the field is much more diverse. But does that mean that we have a new developmental agenda for the global South? That we said, did we say goodbye to the Washington Consensus, as years ago Danny Rodrik assumed that we have? Well, my answer is rather not. When we look at the policy proposals for the global South, it's still, Janek said that neoliberalism is gone, it's obsolete and so on. Maybe in the field of development economics, we are in the state of, let's say, interregnum. The old king, or neoliberal king, is compromised, deeply wounded. But when we look closer, the fundamental assumption of neoliberalism are still in place. For example, no one questions the common assumptions that the economic specialization, the direction of economic development should be determined by market force itself, by market signals. And when we look what the countries which were able to catch up with global North, with the developed West and so on, what they did, they went beyond the market signals. They simply reject the market signals and the market, what the market determine the economic specialization should be. So not much have changed. When you look also, for example, at my favorite example is the new structural economics proposed by Justin Lin when he was a chief economist of the World Bank. And definitely it was a shift in the right direction, but it was too late, too little, and did not last. And he never challenged the assumption that the directions of development should be determined by market forces itself. So in this discourse, the state is still subordinated to the market, and there's only the state role in the economy is only about fixing market signals. So not much has changed in that perspective. And look what I have just did. I have criticized the mainstream agenda from the perspective of industrial policy, but I also assumed implicitly that development economies are about catching up, about promoting economic development understood as the economic growth, industrial and technological upgrading, etc. And this is the luxury we cannot afford anymore. When you look at the policy proposals for, let's say, Egypt, Lebanon, Pakistan, the cash strip countries, right now, this is still good old structural adjustment programs, maybe in the soft version and so on, based on assumption that once macroeconomic stabilization is restored, the markets will do the rest. So still good old narratives. And, I criticize this from the perspective that we should promote development and catch up. We cannot do it anymore if we are to be serious about climate change, about planetary boundaries. And from this perspective, I think the only logical and also moral solution, and also scientifically based solution, is simply the degrowth perspective. Just let me conclude that all the issues about climate change and so on have a way better scientific justification than any economic theory in the entire history of economic thought. Thank you.
Thank you for this cheerful note. I would say, well, do you sign on abolishing all the debts of the southern countries? Because this is what is driving them to grow. Growth is at the agenda, but let's leave it as that. I would like to finish with a question to Stanisław. Being a political scientist and sociologist by training, but importantly also a long-time rector of a prestigious academic institution, how do you view the political mandate of social researchers? Do they have some, or should they not? And do you, as a rector, tolerate view with suspicion or maybe actively encourage public activism among the academic staff?
Thanks. Pozwolicie Państwo, że będę mówił po polsku, ponieważ w tak krótkim czasie więcej mi się uda powiedzieć. Pan Michał, przygotowując to pytanie, ułatwił mi trochę zadanie, ponieważ będąc rektorem Collegium Civitas, mamy tak zdefiniowaną od początku uczelnię przez 26 lat. Nieprzypadkowo właśnie to, że ona powstała w latach 90., że nasza uczelnia jest uczelnią społeczną. Ona konstruując się bardziej odnosiła się do modelu organizacji pozarządowej niż wówczas istniejących uczelni, głównie wtedy zwanych jeszcze państwowymi, teraz publicznymi. Zresztą to jest bardzo ciekawy proces. Dzisiaj była tutaj mowa o ponad 30-letnim okresie liberalnej demokracji, że to był fenomen w skali całej Europy Środkowo-Wschodniej wówczas, co do skali rozwoju szkolnictwa niepublicznego. W żadnym innym kraju ten proces nie osiągnął takiej skali. W żadnym z krajów Europy Środkowo-Wschodniej. Jest taka teza, że rozwój szkolnictwa niepublicznego właśnie w Polsce był motorem zmian w szkolnictwie wówczas państwowym, teraz publicznym. Tutaj w przerwie rozmawialiśmy o modelu feudalnej uczelni. To oczywiście diagnoza tutaj jest bardzo szeroka. W moim przekonaniu w dużym stopniu winę tutaj ponosi sposób finansowania uczelni publicznych, które po prostu są zasilane z budżetu państwa. Uczelnie niepubliczne muszą po prostu rozwijać się same. Będąc na pograniczu, i teraz mówię już o swojej uczelni, organizacji pozarządowej, sfery szkolnictwa wyższego, która jest regulowana przez administrację centralną, przez ministra, i sferę biznesową, ponieważ my musimy działać według rachunku rynkowego, ekonomicznego. To jest jakby pogranicze istnienia. Zresztą jesteśmy w jednej z czołowych uczelni niepublicznych, czyli uczelni Koźmińskiego, która była jednym z prekursorów w ogóle. W tym roku obchodzi 30-lecie prekursorów rozwoju tego sektora. I teraz przechodzę już konkretnie do pytania, że ta nazwa Civitas w naszym rozumieniu, ona odnosi się w szerokim stopniu do partycypacyjnego modelu uczelni. My szereg działań, nawet o charakterze strategicznym, w tym roku aktualizacja strategii na 4 lata odbywała się w sposób partycypacyjny. Były 2 rundy partycypacyjnych konsultacji, gdzie każdy pracownik uczelni, nawet studenci, wykładowcy, administracja mieli prawo wypowiedzenia się i ten głos był wzięty pod uwagę przy konstrukcji końcowej wersji. Więc mamy mnóstwo inicjatyw oddolnych, gdzie stykają się studenci z seniorami. Mamy Uniwersytet Trzeciego Wieku w uczelni, więc mamy sporo seniorów, gdzie są działania właśnie międzygeneracyjne, są działania oddolne, są podejmowane inicjatywy, które mają służyć rozwojowi całej społeczności. I mówię to też dlatego, i to się odnosi już konkretnie do pytania, że jest taka możliwość tworzenia tego typu uczelni. Są oczywiście różne warunki, które muszą być spełnione. My jesteśmy jedną z najmniejszych uczelni w Warszawie, bo chodzi też o skalę. W uczelni, która ma 40 000 studentów, oczywiście nie da się tego zrobić. Prawdopodobnie się nie da. W uczelni, która ma kilka tysięcy studentów, to się da. Jesteśmy tego empirycznym przykładem. I z tego bierze się też zaangażowanie. Tutaj Michał pyta prawdopodobnie głównie o naszą kadrę, ale ja myślę, że tutaj stąd bierze się zaangażowanie wielu naszych studentów przede wszystkim i stwarzanie przestrzeni do nieograniczonej działalności. Mamy liderów organizacji obywatelskich, pozarządowych, którzy no nawet z nazwiska są znani, są dostrzegani i chodzi o to, żeby zapewnić im nieskrępowaną przestrzeń do działalności w samej uczelni, jak i w przestrzeni publicznej. Dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you very much. I will go to the second question because Laura just showed me that we should end by 1:25. But actually we are a little bit ahead of time that was planned for the panel. So I thank you for being this brief. The second question will be more narrow, but I will not target it specifically to each of the panelists. The question is, if you could name and describe just one most important political goal you currently pursue in your capacity as an activist, I mean it broadly, very broadly, what would it be and why this goal in particular? What is currently in dire need of transformation? Because we are talking regeneration and polycrisis. And I would like to go in the same direction, so I would like to start with Sarah.
Thank you. It's a narrow but complex question. The most important political goal, well, for me it's social justice, but I already mentioned it, but it's very, very large. But if I look at the social issues and the environmental issues, for me they have a common roots, is how we operate as a society, in a society where economic profit is king, and we have to change that. So we can change it in different ways. I like to not only fight for ideas, but also through practical things. So fighting for social economy and for a favorable ecosystem for social economy, for me, is a way to reach that goal. For sure, and I think that we really, listening to some of the presentations before and the questions you asked to the other speakers, we really have to question everything and never ever take anything for granted. You know, like, what is social justice? For some people, it's the more you work, the more you earn, and you deserve it. And for others, it's there's enough money around the world, so everybody should be able to eat. So, but let's ask ourselves, you know, like, and let's not ever take anything for an assumption and think, what are the values we want to fight for and why, and what should be the social contract somehow at a political level? What would be fair? And we may have different views on that, of course, but it's good that we question the underlying visions of each of us. And for me, economy has to be embedded again in society and has to be at the service of society, and we've kind of drifted away from that.
Thank you very much, both for stressing the important aspect of contestation, which I share with you, and for being brief. Now we'll go to Piotr, as earlier.
Okay, the same narrow question. I would be very specific in answering this question. What I think is the most important issue, and then it doesn't mean that it's, you know, the number one issue that my institution tackles, but probably a second institution that I worked in a nonprofit in Brussels, the European Roundtable on Climate Change and Sustainable Transition, which is a mouthful name, but it's a small think tank working on climate-related policies, very specific and technical ones, so like CBAM or the ETS, and so that can show that most probably it's mainstreaming climate-related issues and policies to economic thought, economic practice, and also in the creating more acceptance in the society towards these kinds of policies that could be implemented. And what I would name the whole goal of which I see is having a fair energy transition, which is quite different than some of the activists probably present at this here in the audience or here in the panel would say, because I do think that some of the ideas are not easily applicable to each country. There's not a one-size-fits-all in terms of policy, and especially in a society that has a different view of what and a different level of acceptance towards climate policies. That's why you have to adjust them. You have to rethink of what to implement, and also increase the negotiating power with the European Commission on what is feasible in these goals in order to pursue the same kind of level of agenda, which is difficult. So it's not being whole saying, okay, we need to do this and that. Is okay, how to go there, knowing that we need to get there, but not to, make everybody unhappy in the process. And I think this is one of the, and I talk about this quite often, is I do see that being very aggressive with implementing climate policies can lead to a lot of backlash. And this happens in Germany. This happens and might happen after the implementation of ETS2 in a lot of European countries. Because being very bold can also create resistance. And you need to think of how to decrease the effects, how to implement social policy elements that are going to decrease the unacceptance of some certain policies. And yeah, that's kind of what wakes me up at night. Thank you.
For Obama, it was inequalities, and I would say that the fairness of the transition is something that is very very close to many hearts of this in this room, but not only fairness between countries, but also between social strata, which is like tackling the inequalities part of this seems to be very important. But I believe that that I should invite you and ask you to stay on for the next panel, because it's going to be precisely about that. Okay. Now I would like to ask Jan to answer this question.
So I'm going to piggyback on the comments that you just made before. And I think Michael asked this question, which is, what we want, if I have the luxury to dream. So I'm going to just give you my dream without thinking about what wake you up at night, which is how exactly this can be done. But to me, my dream is to really put fighting climate change at the top of the policy agenda for all countries. They could do it in different ways, but I want them to do this in an immediate, effective, just, inclusive, and definitely effective way, right? To me, this is really, as Biden has just said, climate change has become increasingly undeniable for politicians. So they have to do the job. I understand there could be resistance, there could be pushbacks, there could be twists and turns. But this needs to be done. I think one of my slides talked about, countries always think we can afford that, right? Even that could be just costing 3% of GDP per year. But countries avoid doing this and always come up with this question about how we can pay for it, how we can sacrifice this and that to accomplish. I think it's clear if we don't do that, there's nothing left. So I think that would be my dream. Yeah.
Thank you very much. There's nothing for me to do but to ask Zofia for a comment, which will, I think, complement the ones of
Yes.
Jan and Piotr.
So I used to focus on feminist economics mostly, and also like in this field, the number one was feminism, and second, the fight for LGBT plus rights. But now, because of the circumstances, also like preventing climate catastrophe, I would say, even. Yeah, it's the number one. So yes, I'm not so much activist anymore, more scientist, and we do all kind of research. Also, we have one project about energy transition and one about circular economy. But when I have this overview effect, when you imagine yourself being the astronauts and you go to the like outer zone and you see the planet. So this is the place we inhabit. What are the money? What are the other things? This is not important. Important is to save the planet. So now I think it's really urgent, as you said. And we have to join forces. And even if there will be some backlashes and of course disagreement, and we have to sacrifice something, I think this is the major goal right now, to save the planet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for stressing this, which turns out to be a good invitation for you all to the next panel. I would like to ask Adam the same question.
Well, since my activism is mainly limited to the classroom, so my political agenda varies. Simply put, I want my students to beware of economists. Beware of economists who believe that there is such thing as value-neutral, positive economics. Beware of economics who are slaves of one economic doctrine, one ideology, and so on. I think that teaching about economic methodology, teaching about what is the nature of economic knowledge is extremely important. And I really want my students to be able to trace how the political agenda influence the research, influence how we build models, influence what assumption we made or not, and so on. So this is my, let's say, very modest political agenda. About the dreams, so I share the dreams of previous speakers. Thank you.
Okay, so there's another question like spontaneously popping up. So let's finish with Stanisław.
I have a dream. Tak, mam marzenie, żeby politycznie zmaterializował się obywatelski pakt dla edukacji. Nie wiem, czy Państwo znacie. Wielu z Państwa jest z organizacji pozarządowych. Jest to pakt wypracowany przez kilkadziesiąt organizacji obywatelskich, pozarządowych, edukacyjnych. 10 punktów, które jak się przełożą na projekt polityczny, to zmieniłyby kształt zdewastowanej polskiej oświaty. I szkolnictwo wyższe, które reprezentuję, nie jest w tak złym stanie jak oświata. I myślę, że tutaj, biorąc pod uwagę dzisiejsze wprowadzenie Janka i to, przed jakimi wyzwaniami stoimy, a także o tym wyczerpaniu się pewnego modelu demokracji, to myślę, że tutaj wątek edukacyjny jest podstawowy. Ja z przyjemnością dzisiaj widzę na sali młodych ludzi, bo Państwo weźmiecie stery w ręce i będziecie musieli zarządzać tą całą przestrzenią publiczną, która jest w takim stanie, w jakim ona w tej chwili jest. Ale przepraszam jeszcze, ale muszę coś powiedzieć tutaj a propos, nawiązując trochę do Janka i tego modelu wyczerpywania się i do liberalnej demokracji. Widmo illiberalizmu, czyli nieliberalizmu, krąży po Europie. Nie tylko zresztą po Europie. I ja bym postulował, dużą wstrzemięźliwość w krytykowaniu liberalnej demokracji według takiego myślenia, że politycznie my możemy sobie pozwolić na to, żeby demokracji liberalnej nie było, a ekonomicznie ona się uratuje. Bo ona się nie uratuje ekonomicznie. Historycznie rzecz biorąc, nie chcę nawiązywać tutaj do lat 20. XX wieku i przekształcania się modeli niedemokratycznych, myślenia też bardzo krytycznego wobec liberalnej demokracji i przekształcania się demokracji w autorytaryzmy, a wręcz totalitaryzmy, ale już przykłady obecne różnych trzecich dróg, i to z małej litery, nie z dużej, trzecich dróg w krajach latynoamerykańskich, azjatyckich tygrysów, już nie mówiąc o orbanowskich Węgrzech. Proszę Państwa, może ktoś z Państwa mi powie i poda przykład przekształcania się liberalnej demokracji w system nieautorytarny. Bo te wszystkie przykłady, które tutaj podałem, one mają wymiar autorytarny. W Chile za Pinocheta powstał projekt, żeby pod skrzydłami autorytaryzmu robić liberalne reformy ekonomiczne. Zakończyło się to katastrofą. Więc ja nie jestem ortodoksyjnym liberałem. Absolutnie. Ale jeszcze raz podkreślam to, że to nie będzie tak, że będziemy mieli autorytarny system rządów politycznych i przyzwolenie na państwa działalność w takim systemie, bo wam potrzebna jest wolność. Do tego, żeby się rozwijały spółdzielnie, organizacje ekonomiczne różnego rodzaju, kooperatywy i tak dalej, państwu potrzebna jest wolność, a nie to, żeby za chwilę państwo na przykład ingerowało w waszą działalność i zabierało wam to po kawałku. Przepraszam, było trochę z innego porządku, ale musiałem to powiedzieć. Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. Now I wish I could reverse time and put the question to Stanisław first, because I believe this would spark a lot of discussion. But we have a Q&A session, and now's the time to ask questions and comments. Okay, I already see some people. Here we go.
Yes, I have a question to Professor Liang. My name is Beata Jamka. I'm a freelance professor, and I keep thinking about MMT. And my question is, do you believe that any monetary theory has the power to change our goals? Goals that, in last session, almost all of you showed as climate, social things, and so on. As I know, and we can observe, any government always finds money for the goals they want to achieve, independently on the taxes they get. Being devil's advocate, I can say that our government is a great example of using MMT. Because they realize their goals that are important for them, and they don't want us to see in the euro sphere. They keep our currency. When we look at the financial crisis 2008, we could see governments paying banks the money they lost, and no one would think that, well, some people would, but they never told that aloud, that they could have given that money to the people who were clients of the banks so they could get their money back. So my question is that, is any monetary theory a good goal to think about, because it always makes us think about the money as the priority when we now have really different priorities than getting money. Thank you.
I'm so glad that my mission has accomplished. Because I think you are saying exactly the same thing that what MMTers would like to convey to the world, which is money is not important, and do not use money as an excuse to postpone or to dodge any of the real actions that need to be taken. So I applaud for Polish government if they're really practicing some of the policies that MMT would endorse. And I do think that, you know, as a government right now running a 5% debt deficit to GDP ratio, that probably can be bigger. I'm glad to see the policy rate right now. I think, if I understand, it's about 3.5% when your inflation rate is, you know, rather high, and they're not hiking the interest rate like the ECB or the Federal Reserves are doing. So I take your word for it. I think the Polish government is doing all the right things, more or less. But I think there are still many governments in the world that do not understand the power, the financing power that they have. And every time they say, we can afford this, we can afford to provide universal health care, we can afford universal education. You know, I think that kind of narrative needs to be re-examined. And more importantly, we need to let the general public know, to challenge the kind of narrative coming from the government. Because a lot of times, that becomes the last word, that we want to balance the budget of the government, and that's a responsible thing to do. So do not ask for this, do not ask for that. And I think the public needs to be aware that this is a lie. And I agree with you, money is always there. What is lacking is a political will and also the sound economic policies. And I think the same thing, you know, for the United States government, when they had the pandemic, they all of a sudden come up with $5 trillion out of the blue, right? But only about 1/5 of that money actually goes into the real people. A lot of it, like you said, going to the banks, going to the financial corporations and other big corporations. So I think the way I think MMT wants to emphasize is stop thinking about money. You need to think about the real resources. You need to think about what is the way to advance the public purposes of public money, and also stop lying to the people. And for the general public, as the money users, we do bestow the kind of authority to our public administration, and they're supposed to be watching for us. They're supposed to spend the money to advance our interests, our purposes, and that has not been done. And so I think that is really what. You know, not just MMTers, but I think all people, right? Anybody who, economists or not, need to be thinking about those things, which is what kind of policies we want, what kind of public money we want to spend on, and, you know, what is the priorities for the humankind. Yeah, thank you so much.
Sorry, I'm not on the panel, but I intercepted the mic as one of the organizers. Just to add one small thing, because I think this question is great, and just to reply to Professor Liang, it's great that the Polish government understands MMT and it knows how to spend in a Kaleckian and Keynesian way, but now it's becoming more and more of a military Keynesian, because we're not in a race for more spending on healthcare, not on social housing, but we are counting digits. How much can we spend on military spending? Is it 3% GDP, 4%? I just heard 5% somewhere around here in the conference, but I'm not gonna say where it came from.
Thank you for the great panel. My question's rather simple, but I want to add some context beforehand. I heard that people in southeast Poland block windmills because it interrupts their cell coverage. When people get disenfranchised, they become more polarized to the extremes of their political beliefs. You all touched upon this in your talks, how it's becoming more of a hostile environment. And at the same time, we need to strive for a more fair transition, for empathetic and logical discussions. The question's simple. How do we manage the public discussion without descending into just telling people what to do, giving them a voice, and avoiding people making emotional decisions and then rationalizing them afterwards?
Who would take on the question?
It's a very personal point of view that I will give you. Comes out of experience. I'm a strong defender of debates among people and bringing people at the table, because social media has polarized us. You know, we're all speaking with people who think just like us and we're all super convinced, right? And we don't get the other side of the story unless we're very curious or very sociable people. But at a state level, there could be other options, or even in the city level. You can bring people together to talk. You can have random selection. In Belgium, more and more, they're trying that. And I've seen that also in the cooperative where I was. We had an ethical committee. And to make sure that we had a diverse population that was participating to what we're doing, we decided to randomly select people that were representative, proportionally more or less representative of our population. In Belgium, there are a lot of different governments that are trying that. So for a specific topic, let's bring people together to debate. Because the thing is that what you realize when you experience such a process is that you come to the table and you know exactly what you want. You know what's good. And then you hear the other stories, you're like, I didn't think about that way, you know? And it changes, and everybody changes at least slightly their initial position on a given topic. And when we bring people to talk together and to debate and have to take a decision collectively with a responsibility, usually the outcome is better taken into account, because it takes into account different views and the impact. You were saying, indeed, for example, climate change can have different impact on different socioeconomic categories. Okay, of course, one would say, yeah, let's stop the cars. Well, some people need it to work. And they're not the ones who can buy electric cars usually. So we really have to have this debate and have people talk together. I think that's, especially in a period of great changes, with great challenges, we need to put people around the table and have them decide together collectively.
So we will manage 2 more questions, unless anyone else wants to add something else. Okay.
If I can chip on that. So I do believe that there's value in talking everywhere, and you know, from a very Polish perspective, but it's probably very similar in the Rust Belt and the US. You're gonna see people who are disenfranchised with Washington, Brussels, or decisions that are taken very far away, which are then influencing their own individual lives somewhere where, you know, they do feel a disconnect with that certain debate. And I talked with this, for example, with the European Commission and their analysts. That's, you know, you guys do this, but then you have to do the walk and talk, and also come here and talk with the people, then to whom the elected officials have to describe the policies that actually you want them to implement. Because then you won't have honest debate on some certain goals, and of course you're going to have opposition, and those people are not going to vote for anybody who's going to be accepting and willing to implement those policies. And if you're not going to do that, and they're not doing that, then you're going to have a backlash.
I would like to ask Sarah de Heusch, could you tell something more about practice of social economy in your definition? I mean, especially about a place for the trade unions or workers' council or such. I mean, participation of workers in social economy. Thank you.
Well, in most countries, when the union representation is defined by law, if you have ex-workers, you have to have workers' representation in unions, and that applies whatever the legal type of organization. So that's just to start. So you can have, let's say, social economy, specific democratic participation in the strategic guidelines of the company, and then you have unions who are more going to be working really on practical issues of working conditions, well-being, and so on. Because usually the democratic aspect is going to be more about the strategic aims, objectives, economic model of the company, which is different than the worker. It's just like as a citizen or as a consumer, you may be schizophrenic in your ways of thinking, right? As a consumer, you want to pay less. As a citizen, you want a good product, like a sustainable product. And you know, so when you're in an organization, you can have those following. If you have to think of the strategy of the organization or your working conditions, you may have different views on what's the good decision to take. So there is the unions. So in social economy, you have unions just like in any other organizations. It depends on the national legislation. Some organizations, as I said, the democratic participation can be very diverse. It can be just voting for the board who is going to take the decision, or you can have some consultations, or you can have sociocratic governance. It's very, very diverse, and that's a choice of the organizations themselves. I don't know, I hope it answered.
Thank you. There's another question.
I have a question about MMT, so it's kind of directed towards Professor Liang, but we've already established, I suppose, that Poland already introduced MMT in its monetary policy. However, what would happen if the United States took MMT theoretically as the blueprint for its monetary, fiscal, overall economic policy? What would be the potential effects of an economy that is crucial to the world financial system, as well as a country that controls the world reserve currency, for nations that are dependent, that are basically reliant fully on this economic system and on this global financial system. Sorry. So if MMT was introduced in the United States, this theory was put into practice, would there be any effects, positive or negative, felt in smaller states, for example, in Central Europe, those especially dependent on foreign capital? Thank you.
Right. So first of all, I think, again, what MMT does is to provide an accurate description of how monetary and fiscal operations work in monetary solvent governments. So it's not necessarily implement MMT or not, but I get what you're saying is, if they do implement policies that are going to be endorsed, right, by the MMT sort of theory. For that matter, I would say nothing bad would happen. You're not going to see runaway inflation. You're not going to see dollar losing values. I mean, nothing of those natures would happen. So if you really do practice what MMT would prescribe, is you would have a job guarantee program in the United States that would help to strengthen the economy. It would help to provide, whatever that is necessary for the country and the citizens and so on and so forth. A stronger and more prosperous and more just and fair economy. But I would definitely challenge the premise that we should continue to have the current dollarized dollar hegemony kind of a system, which is one of my talks I will be giving at Poznan, is really the question, this whole idea of, how do we debate about, de-dollarization? I don't think the current post-Bretton Woods system, the current international monetary system or global financial architecture, however you call it, is serving the interest of the global economy, especially the global South. So that must go. So I definitely think we do need to have a different world economic order, starting from the financial architecture.
Thank you very much. This concludes the round of Q&A. I would like to thank our panelists, for fruitful discussion. It was very inspiring for me. I hope for you as well. And give them a big round of applause.